The first thing you need to do to begin your process of building a news site is to pick a domain name. That is the URL name, the mynewspaper.com name, and you really need to stick with some of the better known suffixes such as .com, .net, .org. There are a lot of other ones available, but the more esoteric you get with those suffix names, the more uh, shaky or less reputable the whole name might feel to people who are looking at articles that appear in Google News and wondering whether they should visit your site. So whereas you can choose other names and other ones have been successful, it's good to kind of stick with these names. Now, you also, even though you find a .com, you also need to look at the words in the name and decide whether they sound professional. You can be unique and creative and still be professional. So I'm not saying that you should automatically reject anything that kind of sounds a little creative. For example, there's a site called popherald.com. That's a Google News site, and they publish technology articles, and Pop Herald is somewhat creative, and the look of their site is actually kind of creative, and it's professional, but it's not completely out of the ordinary. For example, there's also a site I saw called, I believe it was called Crazy Love or something like that. And whereas you could possibly get it accepted into Google, if you have a site named Crazy Love and then you want to publish topics on politics or sports or technology or health or something like that, those topics may not sound right in conjunction with the publication name of Crazy Love. So I think you want to choose something that has a news flavor to it if you possibly can. Now there are two things here. One is you're choosing the domain name, which is something like nytimes.com. But when you apply to Google, you will also provide a publication name. And the publication name would be The New York Times or New York Times. And you want to make sure that when you buy a domain name that the publication name fits with the domain name and that there's not too much of a difference. In this case, NY Times and New York Times are close enough that I don't think there would be any problems. But certainly you can envision some combinations of names that might not be quite appropriate going together. Also, when you apply to Google News, one of the first questions they ask is that you do not name your publication with a name that is similar to an existing one. So, for example, the Washington Post already exists in Google News as a news source, and you wouldn't want to name your publication the Washington Posts with an S on the end. It's too close, and Google would be suspicious if you did that. So whatever name that you choose, it's a good idea to type that name into Google News and search for it, and just make sure there aren't other publication names that are too similar. Now it can be a little bit close. Google understands that there's only so many names out there and that some of them might sound somewhat similar, but you just want to avoid stepping on one or doing anything that would make Google News a little suspicious of you or likely to not approve you just because of something silly like the name. Another piece of guidance here is that when obtaining a domain name, you can get a brand new one. You can register a new name as long as it doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. Or you can buy a domain that has some age, that already has been created and used by another owner. I have done both of these things. However, there's definitely value in names that or domains rather that have some age. One of the reasons is that usually Google doesn't accept a site that appears brand new. So if you created a brand new domain this week, you could never expect to submit it to Google in 2 or 3 weeks and have them accept it, because as I said earlier, they're looking for a news organization, and usually organizations have taken some time to put together, and they wouldn't expect to have a 3-week old domain name. So the times that I have bought a brand new domain, it's usually sat around in my account for a while, and I've added articles to it over time, so that when I was ready to submit it some months later, like in my case, I did this once with one that was about 9 months old. It did have some age, and it wasn't a problem for Google, and they actually accepted it. But typically what I do is I buy aged names, and the next section of this video is going to show you a little bit about how I do that. So here we are at GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy is the premier location for buying and selling domains. They buy and sell more domain names on the internet than any other company, by far, I believe. And so often when I want to buy a domain name that has some age, I go to this auctions.godaddy.com, and I'm logged in here. So you can get an auctions account, I think for $5. I can't recall. And what you're presented with on auctions.godaddy.com is simply a search box. What I'm going to do, though, before I type something into the search box, is do an advanced search, and I'll show you some of the things. We might look for a word like news in our site. We also can limit the price. I would put like $30 there. I've never had to buy a domain name that cost me more than $25 at the most, and most of them are $8 or $10 or something like that. By definition, the domains that are on auction here have some age, so we won't bother with the age. And I chose the .com, .net, .org, which not coincidentally are listed first in this box. As we mentioned on a previous page, those are the best ones to go for. So we'll hit search on that, and GoDaddy is going to return to us a list of all of the domain names that have the word news somewhere in the name and are offered on auction for less than $30. So you can see that there are actually quite a number of names here. Few of them have this .com, and we chose only .com, .org, and .net, so we would expect to only see those. So you can just go down the list and look at potential names that might be good for a news site. Now, something like US News Day certainly sounds like it has possibilities. It's only $5, and the auction concludes in only 18 hours. So you could pick up this domain name and have it ready to use in about a day or so. But of course, there are many other names here that you can choose from for existing domains. Now, I had typed in the word news. Obviously, you could type all kinds of things. You could type Gazette, Times, Herald, any kind of news-oriented name that you can think of, and other names that might not be news-sounding at all, but could be acceptable for a news site. That may just not be a classic name. So this is a really good source for aged domains. Now, one thing that you want to check for before you buy the domain is try to do a historical search if you can. There's something called the Wayback Machine, for example, that captures some content from a URL, a domain name from the past, and you can type your domain name into the Wayback Machine, and it will show you what the content was on that site in the past. One thing that you want to be a little bit careful about is if you suspect that some of these names have been in Google News or submitted to Google News in the past, but for some reason lost their syndication, then that would not be a name that you would want to choose. Now, I don't know of a way that you can find that out for sure, but I've had pretty good luck with just using the Wayback Machine and observing the content on the site, and you can kind of tell that if it's not, if you find what the old content was and it's not very professional, or on the other hand, if you never find any old content using Wayback or other tools online, then chances are it was never submitted to Google News, was never part of Google News, and you're quite safe with the name. Now, if you want to choose a brand new name, then you have many other choices. I actually like using something called instant domain search, and we'll go right there right now. Instant domain search lets you search for a name that is brand new, completely unused. So if you wanted to, again, go with something like newsday.com, you would find, of course, that something as popular as newsday.com is taken. But if in this, I'm not recommending as a name, but you say if you're choosing something like Newsday Now, you find out that that's available, and then you're given a few different choices here for registrars that you can buy this name from. GoDaddy is showing at $7.99. Namecheap is $10.69. Many names are purchased and sold at GoDaddy. However, I actually use Namecheap whenever I can, because the renewal fees for Namecheap and the privacy subscription for Namecheap are way less expensive than the other providers. Some of the other providers, for example, Register.com, offer a very low initial price, but in order to renew the domain name the second year, they charge you, I don't recall exactly, but it's a lot of money, like $49. So they draw you in with the $250, but then really hit you hard the following years. Whereas Namecheap actually never does that. They keep their prices quite low, and their privacy cost is also free at the beginning and quite low in the future. Whereas GoDaddy charges you quite a bit for privacy. So all in all, Namecheap has worked very well for me to buy a new name. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that if you buy a brand new name, then you really want to let it age for some number of months before you submit it to Google. Then that's why I typically buy older sites if I want to turn the new site around quickly. I buy an aged name and go from there.